The battlefield was set in the ruins of Drempthor, where blackened towers leaned like dying giants. The Shard-born army waited, a sea of darkness under the vessel's command. The clash was apocalyptic. Flames met shadow, steel met claw, screams tore through the night. Ashbringer blazed like a star in Kaelin's hands as he carved through waves of enemies. Serenia led cavalry charges, breaking the monstrous rank. But it was when the vessel stepped forth that the battle reached its true height. Shadows writhed around him, the shard in his chest glowing like a black sun. He called out across the field, "Come, son of Eric, fulfill your destiny. Kneel, and Maelric shall rise again." Kaelin raised Ashbringer. "I kneel to no one." Their duel began, father's legacy against father's killer reborn. Steel rang against shadow, light clashed with darkness. Kaelin fought with everything he had, every strike echoing with his vow. But still, the vessel endured. At the brink of despair, Kaelin remembered his mother's last words, "Never yield, my son." But he understood them differently now. To never yield was not only to resist, but to fight for more than himself. With a roar, he drove Ashbringer into the shard in the vessel's chest. The runes flared white-hot, brighter than the sun. For an instant, Kaelin felt his father beside him, guiding the strike. The shard cracked. The vessel screamed as shadow poured from his body like smoke torn apart by the wind. The darkness shriveled, and Maelric's voice shrieked as it was torn back into nothingness. Kaelin stood victorious. But Ashbringer lay shattered in his hands, its runes extinguished. The Brotherhood triumphed. The Shardborn broke and fled, their power undone with the vessel's fall. Kaelin stood on the battlefield, Ashbringer's fragments at his feet. He did not feel like Eric reborn. He felt like Kaelin, scarred, weary, but unbroken. The people hailed him not as the son of Eric, but as Kaelin the Flame-bearer, the warrior who burned the shadow away. His father's vow had ended with him, but his own had only just begun. When the smoke cleared over Drempthor's ruins, the field was thick with silence. For the first time in years, no chant of shadows rose, no whisper of Maelric's voice lingered in the wind. The black vessel was gone, shattered by Kaelin's hand. The Ashen Brotherhood buried their dead in rows across the plain, and Kaelin himself helped lay each stone. He did not see himself as a king returning triumphant, but as a soldier who had survived. Yet the world saw something different. To the people, he was no longer merely Kaelin. He was the Flame-bearer, the one who had ended the darkness once and for all. Ashbringer lay in fragments after the final battle. Many urged Kaelin to have it reforged, to raise it high as a new symbol of rule. But Kaelin refused. "My father's vow ended with him," he said to Serenia as they stood over the broken steel. "And mine does not need a blade. The flame is not in the sword, it is in the heart." Instead, he buried the shards of Ashbringer beneath the ruins of Drempthor, where his father had fallen, whispering, "Rest now, father. I will carry the vow in my own way." When Kaelin returned to the cities of Thalvern, the nobles who had once branded him outlaw now begged him to take the crown. "Rule us," they cried, "as your father might have. Unite us under your flame." But Kaelin shook his head. "My father fought for the people, not for thrones. If I sit on a crown, I will become what I fought against." Instead, he left rulership to those who squabbled for it, while the Brotherhood spread across the land, not as soldiers of a king, but as guardians of villages, roads, and fields. They became the living creed of the Unyielding. Yet even as Kaelin refused power, his legend grew. Bards sang of him as if he were Eric reborn. Children played at being the flame-bearer, lifting wooden swords to fight invisible shadows. At times, this troubled him. He feared that his true self was lost in the stories, that people would remember him only as his father's echo. But Serenia reminded him, "Legends are not truths, Kaelin. They are torches, and you have given the people light." Years passed. Kaelin never sought a throne, but he built something greater, a school where warriors could learn the creed of the Unyielding. Not a place of crowns or banners, but of fire passed from one soul to another. Among his pupils were farmers' children, shepherds, and even the sons and daughters of nobles who wished to fight not for power, but for justice. Calin taught them what his father had taught him through blood and scars. Never yield, not for yourself but for those who cannot stand. The final night. In his later years, Calin often returned to the sea, where his mother had raised him. One night, under the stars, he dreamt of walking once more through a field of fire. There stood Eric, scarred and proud, with Ashbringer whole in his hands. The two warriors faced each other, father and son. "You carried the vow further than I could," Eric said. "You did not live in my shadow. You burned your own flame." Calin smiled. "And now the flame is no longer ours alone. It belongs to all who stand unyielding." The two clasped forearms, warrior to warrior. Then the dream faded. The eternal flame. Calin's death was quiet, unlike the roaring battles of his youth. He passed in his sleep, old and scarred, but with a faint smile on his lips. The Brotherhood lit great pyres across Thalvern in his honor. People came from every corner of the land, not to mourn, but to promise that his vow would never die. They called him not Calin, son of Eric, but simply Calin the Flamebearer, the man who had turned a father's legacy into a people's creed. And so the legend of the Unyielding lived on, not in a single warrior, but in countless hearts across generations. The flame, once a sword, now burned eternal. Centuries passed. The names of kings and lords rose and fell, their reigns crumbling into dust and forgotten chronicles. Castles toppled, banners rotted, and dynasties turned to whispers. But the creed of the Unyielding endured. In a village far from the old heart of Thalvern, a boy once asked his grandmother why men and women still carved flames upon their shields and doorways. The old woman smiled and told him the story, not of crowns or rulers but of two warriors, Eric the Unyielding and his son, Calin the Flamebearer. She told of a father who stood against shadows when all else had fallen, and of a son who chose not to live in his father's shadow, but to carry the fire into the hearts of all people. The boy listened wide-eyed and asked, "Are they still watching us?" The grandmother looked to the horizon, where the last light of sunset burned like fire upon the mountains. "Perhaps," she whispered, "but even if they are not, their flame is here." She pressed her hand to the boy's chest. "So long as you stand unyielding, they will never be gone." And so the legend lived on, not bound to blood, nor sword, nor throne, but to the courage of those who refused to kneel to darkness. The flame of Eric, the vow of Calin, the creed of all who came after. An eternal fire, unyielding. In the grand archives of Thalvern, deep beneath towers of marble and glass, rests a tome bound in cracked leather. Its pages are brittle with age, yet it is read more than any king's decree or priest's scripture. It is called the Book of Flames. Scholars debate its accuracy. Some say the battles of Eric and Calin were exaggerated, that no man could stand alone against a horde, nor shatter a shard with fire in his hands. Others argue it was truth, written by those who marched beside them. But the people do not care for debate. To them, the book is not history but a guide. Farmers read it before harvest, warriors before battle, children before sleep. Its words are simple, etched across every page in different forms, but always the same in meaning. Stand unyielding. Fight until the end. Legends say that when Thalvern falls into darkness again, the book will burn with light, and from its fire a warrior will rise. Not Eric, not Calin, but another who carries their creed. And so, even in an age of scholars and towers of glass, when swords are but relics and shadows seem distant, the people still carve a single mark into stone, wood, and flesh alike: a flame. The fire of the Unyielding, carried forever. Eric's life began in ashes, but he turned his grief into courage. His scars became his teachers, showing that pain can forge greatness. Eric's blade, Ashbringer, was mighty, but it was his unbreakable will that inspired others. Calin carried this truth forward when he realized the flame lived not in steel, but in the heart. Kalen feared being only his father's echo or worse, a vessel for Malric's darkness. But he learned that true legacy is not imitation, but choosing your own path. Where kings and nobles failed, the people stood together under the creed of the unyielding. Leadership was not about thrones, but about carrying others through darkness. Eric became a symbol, Kalen became a torchbearer, but the creed lived on because ordinary men and women chose to embody it. Legends are not cages, they are sparks for future flames.